That was her first flight, and unfortunately the last.
Gradually, as it died down, the money had gone and the life had gone, and she had to be pulled out of school and everything just stopped.
There was a moral obligation to carry out an investigation to really determine what had happened and put the public mind at rest about it after all those years. But that didn't happen, unfortunately.
I would like to say that I'm so glad that Australia as a whole gets some little credit perhaps from what poor efforts my own aviation exploits can bring to it. And I intend to go on flying until either I have to put the crutches on one side and be poked into the cockpit, but I'll do it somehow.
Kingsford Smith, Aussie is proud of you, proud it's true, of you and your gallant crew through the storm so terrific, flying for the Pacific.
Australian National Airways was formed by Kingsford Smith and Charles Ulm in the wake of their trailblazing Trans-Pacific flight in 1928, which earned them a lot of money, and they'd long held an ambition to build an airline, and this gave them the means to do it.
Kingsford Smith, we'll tell the world that we're proud of you.
There were two aircraft scheduled for departure that morning. The Southern Cloud was scheduled to fly to Melbourne, and another Avro 10, a sister ship, was scheduled to fly to Brisbane. The departure times were similar. In fact, the coach driver had a joke of telling passengers, don't get on the wrong aircraft or you'll end up in Brisbane instead of Melbourne. So that was his standard spiel when the passengers arrived at Mascot Airport to board the two aircraft which were waiting for departure.
A windy, blustery, horrible day, and you would never have thought a plane would have ever taken off in it.
The aircraft took off. It took off into the north. It circled round to the right over the hangars, and then, as the ANA staff said later, struck out towards the west.
That was an extremely bad day. Ships were hove to outside the harbour. I came up from Melbourne that day, of course, and I took off at Melbourne, raining, low cloud. By the time I got to 6,000 or 7,000 feet, ice all over the aeroplane, in cloud. Now, I never saw the ground.
Captain, Travis Shortridge, had no idea that he was flying into extremely strong winds which carried the aircraft much further to the east than he was expecting to fly.
The wind was blowing at the height I was at 100 miles an hour, and it must have been 60 or 70 miles an hour near the ground. So that Shortridge going south, heading into that wind in an aeroplane that only did 90 miles an hour, wouldn't make much progress. In fact, if he tried to go out over the Riverina Plains, the aeroplane would just go sideways. The aeroplane disappeared in the trees, and nobody was able to find it.
These reports were discounted by the search organisers because they did not believe that the aircraft could have been so far to the east. They knew it was Shortridge's practice to head for the west when the weather was bad, and they believed that this is what he had done.
Charles Elm and I looked for him for many a long day. We flew all over the place.
As the search went on, day after day, with no sign of the aircraft, and this made increasingly bold headlines in the papers, it seemed to fire the public's imagination, and reports of the aircraft sighting poured in from all sorts of unlikely places, even as far west as Bendigo and Ballarat and Port Phillip Bay. This confused the search organisers, because some people were now saying that the aircraft had overflown Melbourne and probably had gone into Port Phillip Bay. But the search organisers, who were of course operating without a great deal of experience in aircraft searches at that time, as the airline industry was so young, they did not stop to try and recreate the aircraft's possible track, knowing the strength of the winds that existed that day. Had they done that, they might have had a more accurate idea of where to look. But there were so many widespread reports of sightings of the aircraft that virtually total confusion reigned.
She was the daughter of Shortridge, and he was in the paper just about every day or every second day. And he didn't even get an introduction. It was Shortridge did this, and you know, Shortridge did that, or Shortridge went to a dinner dance last night. And she was the darling daughter, and she was taken up and flown around Sydney by various people. She was the first child to fly above Sydney at night with Smithy. So it was a very glittering world for her. And then it just stopped. And I suppose people don't come and be terribly sympathetic when they don't know someone's dead.
After he'd been to Sydney and done this business trip, then he promised my mother, we'll go and have our trip. So none of that, of course, ever came to fruition. She lost him. We all lost him.
She was taking a nice holiday to visit her sister, Ada Nightingale, in Sydney, and was to return by train, but decided to take the flight on the Southern Cloud and unfortunately didn't return. Well, it hits my heart. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's sort of, it's special to me. It's a part of our family that is gone, but it's not really gone.
I miss the fact of not having a father. I really miss that in my life. He was such a good father, and I'd been told this so often, and he was such a good father to all of us and a good husband, that I really used to feel when all my girlfriends had their dads, and I'd envy them. I think, oh, why haven't I got a father? It would have been a totally different life, totally different for all of us. Not only the immediate family of his wife and his two daughters, his whole family. They've all, the uncles that survived years and years and years later, I've met them down in Melbourne, and cousins, and everybody said, oh, all of our lives would have been different if Bert had lived.
Yes, it was a mystery that intrigued a whole generations of Australians. They never forgot the mystery. It kept cropping up in press reports or interviews or even dreams people had. As late as 1950, the Department of Civil Aviation was still getting letters from people who had theories about what might have happened to the Southern Cloud, or of some dream that they'd had which tell them where the Southern Cloud's wreckage was to be found. Somehow the mystery of the Southern Cloud became deeply embedded in the Australian psyche. It was on everybody's lips amongst that generation.
Come up and have a look at me. Why don't you come up here?
A 27-year-old carpenter, Tom Saunter, had found the wreckage of an aircraft, and leading a party of accident investigators, police, newsreel and pressmen into the isolated spot, discovered the answer to a riddle created before he was born. Just 200 feet from the top of the 5,000 feet high Toolong Range, on the direct path of today's Melbourne-Sydney air route, they found the remains of a plane.
Looking ahead to see where I could go, I saw a small mound of earth. Different colour, dark orange or something, and perhaps alongside of it a hole. And then that was about 8 metres in front and a couple of metres up the slope. And maybe 2 metres above I could see a small piece of steel, which I imagined might be some sort of a rig that miners, having been in the area, might have used. Okay, I might as well investigate this. Well, to get some sort of achievement for the morning's effort. And walking up to the hole, looking down at the hole, I absentmindedly put my left hand up on the steel, and then after looking down the hole, I looked up at my left hand, and shock, I could clearly see the steel framework of a tail flap of an aeroplane.
A thermos flask still contained liquid. 3 Lynx engines were buried a depth of 3 feet. Bearings still contained grease. The manufacturer's plate identified the Southern Cloud. 27-year-old mystery was solved. After 5.5 hours flight, but only 220 air miles from Sydney, the airliner had turned back northeast towards Sydney in the violent storm raging over the mountains. But the final moments on the flight deck can never be reconstructed.
I suppose the most important moment for me was a moonlit night down on Bondi Beach shortly after, I can't remember. And we went down and my mother wrote in the sand, "Daddy, now I know where you are." And we stood there till the water washed the writing away, and that was probably the biggest thing for me.
Have you been able to determine anything at all about the crash itself?
Yes, the disposition of trees and the fuselage frame and the engines, it was quite evident the aircraft crashed into the hillside, steeply banked to starboard. It's also quite obvious the aircraft caught fire on impact. That's been established by this piece of molten metal that could have only have burnt in a very fierce fire, which would be generated by oil and petrol, and also from this watch, which you'll notice has a ceramic face. It would be quite an intense fire that would melt ceramic.
A finding that fire had occurred at the time probably solved a lot of questions that would have otherwise been unanswered. The fact that the aeroplane burnt, if it did burn at the time, would have suggested that everybody had died at the time and at that point, and therefore there was no question of what might have happened to survivors. If the investigation had come up with a finding that some survived at the accident, it no doubt would have caused all sorts of heartburn to those who were still living. I think there was a measure of convenience in determining that the aircraft had burnt fiercely on impact and that there were no survivors. I think it was the easy way out. Perhaps they lacked imagination in not taking into account what the Australian public deserved to hear. The official report concluded that there were no survivors, that the crash was non-survivable. But I believe there were survivors, because I don't believe the aircraft burnt at the time, and I think there is evidence amongst the relics that were discovered that somebody, at least one person, survived the accident. The remains of a bellows camera that was found about 70 feet down the slope behind where the aircraft crashed. I don't see how a camera could have got there any other way other than having been placed there by someone, and that indicates to me that there's at least one person survived the crash.
seen the smoke, so that's the first bit.
Unfortunately, none of the residents of Tintaldra were able to read Morse code, if indeed it was Morse code that was being sent, and so the source or meaning of the light signals remains unknown. But certainly somebody was trying to signal, and from the position in which the wreckage was finally discovered, it seems very likely that the light signals were coming from a source near that site. In those days, of course, the part of the Snowy Mountains where the aircraft came down was utterly remote. Between them and the nearest civilization lay gorges, heavy timber, steep slopes, and they probably were injured in any case. So the question of their having be able to get out of that situation was almost impossible. Possibly 1, 2 or even 3 may still remain somewhere on the rugged slopes of the Snowy Mountains.
In the backpack, I've got my mother's ashes. Mum died in '99, and her wish was always to have her ashes spread over the crash site of her, her father. That's what I'm going to do today. That was her last wish. Boy, this is amazing. How you doing there, guys? All right? It just shows you how unfit you are. Treaties that don't slide down. I think we found it. We found it. It's amazing, though. I mean, all my life I've sort of read about it and thought about it, and Mum talked about it, and here we are. Mother's wish was always to have her ashes spread over the crash of the Southern Cloud, and here we are, and we're doing it for you, for her. So Mother, finally at rest. Rest in peace. Okay. Well, it's your last wish, Mother.
Melbourne.